Muphe, for agreeing to discuss this issue of higher education funding in our country. It's been a vexing issue for very many years, and given where you are located in the higher education system, we thought it extremely important to elicit your views on funding. And but first, I'd like to congratulate you on behalf of SASFI for the honor, the honorary doctorate, the second, that you received from the University of Montpellier. Could you first just tell us what that was about and why it is significant? We have read the notes and the citation from Montpellier with much excitement and pride, but would you tell us whether this indeed means that we as a country have got universities and establishments that are internationally recognized, and that we have standing, and are we producing the right caliber of intellectuals and research papers and innovation that we should be? Are we standing shoulder to shoulder with our peers in the world?
Well, I was going to say, you can only ask the French. They did it on me, not the other way around. Yes. Well, I mean, like as they said, it was about recognition for my what I see as early efforts. I'm only in my third year in this job, as you well know. I wasn't expecting this, and let me just give a bit of background. I was at BITS where I chaired the Honorary Degrees Committee, and I chaired here at UP as well. When I look back, the average age is always above 65. I'm not there yet, so I'll get there. And also, it's normally people who are retired from their jobs, and normally I don't remember us giving a sitting vice chancellor. So, you know, on both occasions when I got the email, I thought it was scam. So, so I didn't check whether this was correct or indeed. So it was totally unexpected and blindsiding. But you see, you can't determine how other people are going to honor you or how people see you. But in relation to what they say they offered it for me, it is true that one of my planks as Vice Chancellor is to forge international collaborations and partnerships. But by international, I'm not like some people define Africa out of international. We are part of the international community as a country, as a continent, and also as academic institutions. So I have a framework here which I'm using to drive this, which is called the African Global University. I think you'll see it on my social media. They always end with at the African Global University. I'm making multiple points there. African, you can see, is ahead of global. Because you see, I hope that I hope this point is not to be seen as an attack of other universities in our system. But also, it's not universities. I see, for example, in Joburg, because you said a world-class African city. So world comes before African. I don't think you can be world before you are African.
Yes.
You get to the rest of the world by being African. And also, people call themselves a world-class African university. No, I don't understand how that can be, because in the stakes of knowledge, you contribute from your contextual location.
So it's our specificity that we have to contribute to the world.
Yes, and also people will partner with you because you come from a certain specificity which will bring unique insights they would otherwise not have on their own. And you engage with them also on the same basis that, you know, I wouldn't possibly understand France in full if I didn't engage with Montpellier. But also then it's not just that exchange, you know, that exchange is also what do then co-create together, understanding that you want to create better societies locally, and also in that way you create a better world, if you like. Well, that is what they said they gave me the honorary doctorate in. Then I would say, well, it's an early recognition of my efforts and an endorsement that I'm going in the right direction. But at the end of the day, this won't matter if I simply am celebrated in France, but I'm not making any progress in South Africa or on our African continent. So while respecting the award, I treat it as in a cautionary fashion, or I don't allow it to go to my head because my work is yet to be done, given that I'm only in the third year of my it's a source of encouragement, but it's a source of pressure. I know the expression people like, no pressure. That is how I felt. Yeah. So, but I mean, there was a number of things you asked there. Yes, I think if you see universities, our peer universities in the world, because the honor really is not really mine. Of course, it's given to an individual. But if I was sitting at home, I wouldn't have got this honor because I got the honor while working for the University of Pretoria in South Africa, higher education system, part of the South African. So in my acceptance, I did say I'm accepting it on behalf of UP, African University, South Africa, and the continent, because it's in within that context that I've been able to do this work and working with others. Now, if I sat in my nice office here and did nothing, just issued emails and so on, and people ignored them or did something about them in their own interest, this would amount to nothing. So I think that South African universities are really respected among our global peers. And when I was there, I heard interesting things even about University of Pretoria academics collaborating with other French academics, which I didn't know. Know how big a university is.
Yeah.
And then also on my final day in Montpellier, there was a big where Macron came to talk to the youth in mostly West Africa, actually, to be frank. But there were different groups of people. We were in the higher education sector. A French student came onto a panel and started praising the University of Pretoria and South African higher education, South African and African higher education. And I think even said people don't want to understand something ought to go to universities like UP. I don't know that student. I couldn't find it after that because I wanted to record it.
I see that the University of Pretoria also fared very well on the recent Financial Times rankings, international rankings of universities. What mainly do you attribute that to? I do understand that there are a web of efforts, some of which you say you were not aware of, but what do you think mainly are the reasons why we rank that high?
No, I think a commitment to quality and excellence, but not one that is just divorced from context. For me, context is almost everything. Your quality is comparable globally, but you perform quality in a particular context. And also all of the stuff about innovation. And innovation is a response, I think, a unique response to a specific context and specific challenges. I think that commitment to quality and excellence, and also being engaged with the challenges and the opportunities in your own context, and also not being daunted, if you like, by some of those things that appear impossible. I mean, there are many people like Mandela's quote, it is not, it looks impossible until it is done, or something of the sort. Or they use it rather too glibly, but it's substantially, it means something that so is that. And also engagement with your own context, not just quality and excellence. Universities can do quality and excellence, and it might have nothing to do with engaging with your context. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Almost like generic, abstract, and so on and so on and so forth. So I think that for me, it's not quality teaching, research, and learning, but also engagement with your context. So that's why at UP we have 56,000 students, at least 33,000, either through their research or through their courses they do or volunteering. We engage with the various communities doing a range of things. I mean, Saturday evening, I'll spend it with our medical students who spend their weekends, despite the tough curriculum and hours, helping matric students in Mamelodi and in Lodium, and helping them not learn their subjects, apply to universities, engage in community projects. I mean, many medical students would say the free time I have, I just have to rest. But they actually, and the university didn't ask them to do this.
Yeah.
But every year they ask me for a dinner to fundraise, to inform me what I do, and also to ask for my advice. And I go, despite that it's a weekend and so on and so forth. But that kind of spirit where you say, as an
initiative.
Yes, initiative, but also recognizing your privilege and giving back is absolutely important. And also seeing yourself as part of the solution to the challenges that you have. Because too many people could be like cynical. Yeah, no, it's not my problem. I sorted it out for myself. Why didn't they sort it out for themselves? And with that kind of spirit, you can't build better communities or a better country or even a continent.
So back to the not being daunted by challenges. We in higher education in South Africa have a daunting challenge of funding. And funding problems and funding deficits impact on the quality of learning, teaching, and most importantly, our glaring problem of access to higher education. When you travel abroad and you see other systems of funding, what is it that you think we could do?
No, I think that it's no revelation from me if we say that the funding and financing system of higher education in South Africa is not what it ought to be, and runs the risk of perpetuating historical injustices and inequalities. Not even a risk, it does.
It does.
So that people come
it
from
reproduces those social
yes. So if we're going to address poverty, inequality, and live up to the fundamentals around social justice in our constitution, you can't leave the funding as it is, because basically there are some people who are left unfunded. Until the recent NEFSAS dispensation, despite how it was implemented, it actually sorted out a real problem, because the people it covers could not pay and could not access higher education. And you quite rightly say, if you are not properly funded, focusing on your studies becomes impossible. Because people remember that what comes through with the lack of proper funding is not just paying the tuition fee or accommodation fee, it's having food, having the means to live, having the transport to go to university, because not everybody, in our system, not everybody can stay in race. And who stays furthest from universities is normally the Black people who are poor. And historically, we know why, from slavery to colonialism to apartheid.
Apartheid special.
Yeah. So it also always raises to me, the point I keep on making is that that's one of the things that was not sorted out in 1994. Because we should not be talking about it now, because that means we've lost so much time. But perhaps before I answer further, let me just step back and say, really, actually remember that educating people here is not just about that individuals will benefit. Yes, individuals do benefit from a higher education, and because of the social mobility they can gain. However, this is more fundamentally about actually producing a well-educated, well-skilled, rounded citizens to take our country to the next level. If you look at everything in South Africa, we have fewer engineers that we should have. In South Africa here, I mean by extension the continent as well. Fewer engineers, nurses, doctors, accountants, and all of that. I hear those people often complain that there are too many students in the humanities. Actually, it's not necessarily true. We actually need more musicians, because musicians are not covered in numbers. They are covered in what music they will produce and what it does to the nation's identity. So often, just simply, if you like, with an undereducated population, we're going to realize our potential, being the continent with fastest growing continent, youthful, abundance of social of natural resources, albeit used for the few. We need actually that skill, that highly educated in a context that is changing. So an investment in higher education should not be looked narrowly as an investment in the individual. So it's a little bit of a surprising.
May I ask you what you would say is the quantum of the opportunity lost since '94 in not addressing this issue?
No, let me put it this way, it's huge. I mean, remember that where we came from. We came from a situation where Bantu education didn't allow people to get the education they should. So there was that deficit already in 1994. Now to not address the issue comprehensively since 94 to today is to compound by multiple factors the problem. I mean, so you can see it through people who our throughput levels are low, the people who owe universities money but have not been able to complete their qualifications. So it was an investment lost as well, because for each person who struggles to take themselves through, but can't complete, it's a double loss, it's a treble loss for the individual, their family, treble loss for the university, not treble, but another loss for the university and then for society as a whole. So I mean, that is why I'm loath to quantify, because I can't imagine what the quantum is. Or put another way, imagine we sorted this out differently. Where would we be? Let me put it and say, we would have more doctors and engineers, more specialists and all of that. In all of those areas where we say we lack skills, the shortage would not be this high, if you like. So everywhere you look, the not addressing this issue comprehensively and sustainable is costing us every day, almost every hour.
In preparation for this discussion with you, I read what Professor Stiglitz, describing the American student debt problem, describes as the economic impact of heavy student debt. He talks about deferred economic decisions, like the decision to form a household, the decision to invest in a new business, the decision to enlarge the American economy to be more economically active. It's not just a problem that presents itself at the point of access, but post-access.
Yeah, yes,
student debt is levied.
Because remember, when you admit something into a higher education or any educational institution, you want to develop their potential. But that potential is not again for themselves, because people tend to look at it narrowly. It's the contribution they will make to economic development and to society's development. If it is not realized, you have lost something. And I agree with Stiglitz in that all those are the multiple ways, and there are even much more than that. It also creates a particular kind of society where, on the one hand, there's potential and opportunity, but there are blockages. So it creates a kind of an unhappy society, if I may put it that way, because of frustrated ambitions and potential. But generally, if you like, drags back society from where it actually could be. So when any challenge arises, you can't address it. You can't divorce this from vaccine hesitancy, people not appreciating the climate crisis and all of that, and levels of violence, whether it's gender-based violence and femicide, violence against children, or violence in society in general. Yes. Yeah. So I think that's why I say, for me, I always think about every day as costly by the hour.
Yes, the multiple crises we incur by not addressing it. What would it take for us, Prof, to finally address this issue as a sector, as a society, and what would society and policymakers and people in institutions like you need to do for us to finally, begin to make headway on this issue?
So I think here we have a very interesting situation in South Africa. And I try to explain. We have had these panel debates, and last year or the year before, universities public universities in South Africa are not saying everyone must pay fees. They are saying providing higher education must be properly funded and financed in a sustainable way. Because often that is lost. I saw it during Fees Must Fall.
Yes.
People thought that universities were addicted on fees.
Yes.
And so they were reacting that way because of their addiction. No, universities actually, if they are public universities, not businesses, want it funded. How it is funded, it's not that we are agnostic about it because we are members of society. We need to know, we understand that funding something over there might mean funding less over there. In other words, funding higher education might result in not funding certain social programs. We understand striking those balances. But we simply know that if you're going to provide excellence and appropriate education, it must be funded. Right. And also, given our historical context, to say anyone must pay the same fees is to ignore the inequalities that you can't. And then also is to shoot yourself in the foot, right? So then also the question of free education then comes in. Then it gets ideological because some people will then say, no, but nothing is free. It's true that nothing is free, but using that expression doesn't mean you want someone who can't pay to pay because they can't pay. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So what it would take is political will and a recognition of what would benefit if the system was sustainably funded over the long period. There are many different ways of making sure that those who benefit pay back to society. You know yourself, I'm an immigrant. I came from Zimbabwe, and I didn't come from a rich family. My parents were ordinary primary school teachers, all right? And so I benefited from a NEFSAS-like dispensation, which was structured very well. 50% of it was a grant. I didn't have to pay. 50% I had to pay at fixed interest rate when I started working. And that payback, made it a revolving fund. And then what's wrong with doing that? And also, if you could pay, by the way, in the Zimbabwean system, but you wanted that loan, it was simply ramped up to 100% pay back the money, right? Because you could. But because space of black tax and especially post 1980, even people who were CEO were carrying so much black tax that it was not actually possible to also fund a student aid. It covered accommodation, all of those and all of those. And look what the system did produce and still produce. So there are checks and balances around how you balance it and you steer the individual towards giving back. But the investment in the individual is finally a public, social, and an economic investment in the nation. So here, political will is very, very important. And these are the things, by the way, if you ask, what are vice chancellors doing? I'm the chairman of the financial the financial, what is called the strategic funding strategy group at USAF, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at last year after COVID, I and a colleague at UP produced a document which I'll send to you guys called Reimagining the Higher Education Sector in South Africa. And we predicated it on the fact that the sector faces a financial crisis anyway. And we suggested a number of measures. And the 5 priorities, which I'll present again on Friday to my fellow vice chancellors, are exactly around finding a long-term solution to that. And this is a mantra we've been singing: before fees must fall, during fees must fall, and even now. So you will see it in the what I call the reimagined document. But
what are those 5 points, Prof?
The 5 points have to do with finding a long-term solution to financial sustainability of the universities. Second, addressing the historical inequalities between the institutions. So because I think it's a scandal that today we still talk about white universities or historically white universities, black universities system. That should also have been eradicated because we have 26 public universities with varying enrollments. Those enrollments actually are not adequate for South Africa's future skills need. That's my view. We actually need, I've said this, we need more universities and larger universities. And look at an example of China. Then also, it's also addressing also this question of tuition fees. Is how tuition fees, the way they are structured now, necessarily the best way of doing so. And also, then also addressing the sustainability of NEFSAS as it currently stands. As you can see, this year there was a crisis. The government looked like either it didn't budget for it or they couldn't find the money. How did they find the money? By repurposing existing budgets. But that is not the way to do. What the system requires is increasing investments, whether it's for research, training, and since we should grow our enrollments, also funding people. The people qualify for NEFSAS, but there is a missing Mickey, which we are not even talking about. Those people not covered by NEFSAS and not rich enough to pay for themselves. At my university, they are 60%. It's the majority. And it's, as you and I know, you're an economist, you are an economic journalist, and you have studied economics, I know, is the middle class. Teachers, soldiers, nurses, and all of those people often are contributing immensely, but can't afford their
what often I worry about, Prof, is that often the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is buoyed by the pensions of precisely the teachers, the nurses, the policemen, and the prison warders, and that is in the form of the PIC. The fact that there are deferred earnings can fund major deals and companies and risk for this economy. But the very same people whose money is floating through our multi-trillion exchange are the people whose kids cannot afford to go to school to keep the economy afloat in the future.
Huge contradiction and also short-sighted in the long term, because those people are the basis upon which those investments could even be better if they were better skilled. So on the one hand, we complain about lack of skills, there's even stuff like critical skills shortages, but you actually could use, not even, and then I hear you implying that it's not even all of the money that will be used for that. It's easy. It's a proportion of it, but strategically invested in something that you actually need. Because as we all know, no nation has ever succeeded without a well-educated and skilled workforce. And you can't get it on the cheap. You have to invest something into it. Right. So seems short-sighted to me, and also not actually looking at the sustainability even of society and the sustainability of those investments. I mean, those who know better, yours and your brother, my good friend, Juma Kovule, will tell you about why that this actually will give you multiple examples about how going that way impact is short-sighted economically even, and that or otherwise you are speculating with funds that should be used for what is a social and a public investment, but which is huge, which would have huge implications for economic development and inclusive economic growth. Because like I said at the beginning, doing it this way perpetuates the inequalities in our society.
I'd like to ask you a question based on a quote by Stanley Fish, and he says, in general, higher education does not know how to speak for its interests. Please comment.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I know Stanley Fish. Didn't he work at the IMF and World Bank? Or was this a different guy? Yeah. So, yeah, no, I think he has a general point there is that typically academics were not trained towards, most academics are not trained towards translating the knowledge that they produce or the things that they know into policy advocacy, if you like. This is not to say you will necessarily be successful. You can ask Joseph Stiglitz, who's a good friend, him and his wife, and that in the American system as well, you have other lobbyists caught by vested interests and special interests. But it is generally true. That is why for us at UP, we're now focusing quite a lot on what we call translation. How does what we know translate into influencing the public debate and putting and lobbying in the policy process? I don't want to be rude, but also you also might want legislators who are able to appreciate stuff that is coming their way. Not all our legislators are necessarily chosen that way, but I mean there is a history to that as well. So just a structured policy of lobbying as well is not something that most people are. And that is why when at USAP, I always raise this issue is that we must actually collectively raise our voice as the vice chancellors and raise those three issues. So for example, at the beginning of this year when there was that crisis, we put forward from my strategy group and it was accepted by my colleagues. And I think we articulated it in a meeting with the minister that one, can we make sure that there is a comprehensive addressing of student debt by certain timeframes? Second, that can we make sure that at least while we're addressing this big issue, 2022 January is not marked by protests again, which has become an annual ritual in the African higher education sector. And third, can we now actually put our heads towards a long-term sustainable solution? The minister has put a task team to that, which has worked. Today, I met with Sizwe Nkasana, came to see me. He has ISFAP. ISFAP is a private sector-led attempt to fund missing middle students. He showed me his presentation that he gave to the task team as well. But as I always say to my colleagues, we are kind of out of time. I would like greater urgency and speed in resolving this issue, because each day we don't resolve those issues, there is a harm to the system, and it's like a cancer almost. You don't see its effects now, but you can see it on the continent where things went wrong. That if you do not address these things in now, long term, you will have a weakened higher education system. But again, ordinary people will lose the ability to have their potential realized.
What is it that we as alumni groups and activists for access to education and as SASFI, concerned citizens who want to help our country, our government to resolve this issue, what can we do? What is your advice to us?
Yeah, no, I like your question very much, because I think that, as you and I know, to succeed in the policy arena and in the political arena, you need as many voices and as powerful voices as you can get. Many alumni actually, have done well for themselves, but are also constituents of our legislators and our policymakers. So I don't know whether you are aware that the chancellors of universities created an association. It's I think led by Precious Motsepe, or at least she was convening it. And one of the things they asked us is almost a similar question. And our answer was simply is that where they go, sometimes where we don't even go as vice chancellors, the lobbying factors are these three talking points, addressing sustainable long-term funding in the best interest of the country, even if some people might see it as individual benefit. Because sometimes when we say it is VCs, you know what people think? The guy can't run his finances, so now he wants everybody to talk on behalf of him. But people often don't understand we're leading public institutions.
Yeah, this is a public institution, and this is for. Yeah.
There's no dividends for Tawana and Sons.
It's not a biographical project.
Perfect, yes. And also the benefits are not difficult to see. When you have good teachers, you have good health system, doctors, good infrastructure drives economic development. You need your engineers and all of that. Everybody benefits,
So, Prof, as we head into the new year, SASFI has got ideas about whether we can throw research minds and money at having a special chair on higher education funding, so that once we have this, we could elevate the importance of the issue, the urgency of the issue, and to get not just us to learn from it, but other societies that study us, so that we can leave a track record of knowledge generation, of exploration in the area of best university funding models, and contribute these to our society and to posterity. What do you think of that idea, including our idea about going to Parliament?
Yeah, fully supported. I think it's the way to go. In fact, I think I would say that, and here at UP, let me just, why I support that idea is that I've asked the School of Education and various people who work with that, and Professor Gerald Ouma is one of those experts in that area. Him and I wrote the Reimagining Higher Education document, published by USAF as working paper #1 or whatever. Is that we must form a stronger centers at universities around higher education policy, management, and all of that. And at the core of it must also be higher education funding and financing, and draw upon researchers across the entire system. And a chair normally, as you know, focuses that. And for me, it shouldn't be one chair. And I'm not saying SASFI alone should carry the burden. Every university should form consortia and fundraise, and there are 4 or 5 chairs, and at least one in the Gauteng region, one in all of our provinces with any such a centers, because you also want critical mass and scale, because there are so many elements to the funding thing. Tuition fee is only one thing. There's accommodation, there is transport, there's meals. Because if a person comes from now unequal society, from a household that is living on social grants, you can be sure they need everything that would get them to university. But one hopes that actually the core of the funding system takes care of that. But you are right that perhaps policymakers need the weight of the evidence of that comprehensive research produced in such a professional and expert way. So absolutely, I will end with SASFI on that one.
Our last question to you, Prof, is to get you to comment on Barack Obama's statement, where he says higher education cannot be a luxury reserved just for a privileged few. It is an economic necessity for every family.
Absolutely. I mean, social mobility, as you know, higher education gives you social mobility at the same time as it contributes to national development. And also, education, I think for me, is a right anyway. So the funding and financing of education, especially access to it, must actually not undermine that right. Because without an education, you can't advance in our societies. Everything needs some qualification or certification of one kind or another. And higher education, particularly for the higher level jobs, without that higher education, you can't. And so it can be, as the critics from Peace Must Fall said, commodification and privatization of higher education undermines a fundamental right. That education, all of it, for me, it should be articulated from early childhood development all the way to higher education, funded properly and find the modes and identify the sources like you identified one, because you then realize that right. But it's not about my right. It's about that the person who gets it is a fundamental asset to society.
Prof, on that note, we'd like to thank you as SASFI for speaking to us, and we do hope that we're going to meet you in this long journey, and as you put it, as we seek to be part of the solution to our country's problems. We wish you strength and all the very best in the new year, and that you keep safe.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, good to see